Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special episode of the Soldier Sessions. Is it not only the season premiere of season 2, but we have two individuals with us now. That is a first for the show. So, yes, I will let you take the reign. Who are you for the season premiere of the Soul Session season 2?
Well, I'm Justin Giuseppe Chardulo. I'm the associate producer of Jambone Pictures, as well as associate producer for The Ballad of Gina Frankie, with, of course, the executive producer, John Victor Ambrose. And, happy to be back in the game, professional wrestling film again, and happy to be on here. Thank you so much, Ben.
Always, it's a pleasure, man. And Patrick, yourself to the viewers.
Yes, my name is Patrick Hickey Jr. I am the editor-in-chief and owner of Legacy Comics. I'm also a staff writer at Old School Gamer magazine, and I am the author of The Minds Behind the Games video game book history series.
As you see, viewers, two classy individuals with a great resume under their belts. So for our viewers who are not familiar with The Ballad of Gina Frankie, I would recommend you check out our previous episodes from season 1, which featured John Ambrose. They talked about the documentary's inception and the story. But for our viewers who are joining us for season 2 premiere, Justin, would you care to explain the story of The Ballad of Gina Frankie?
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to go into, it's a very interesting story because, it really started in, so I played Gia Savitz, of course. And, I made my pro debut June 2004 out in Massachusetts. That's when the pro journey started. But then, before that, I had, this is a kind of hard, a backyard run, which who hasn't, Brian Danielson had that. And Patrick, you're aware of all that. I think, did CM Punk, Patrick, even do some backyard?
Oh, yeah. He had his own backyard promotion for quite some time. Yeah.
That happened too. So that's a common practice among a lot of people. And we show, also some of my childhood a little bit and things like that. And then it goes into, just the stalker comes in the picture based on a true story, of course. Frankie Firestarter really drills, how it was, what I was doing, with that character and everything, Gia Savitz and portraying that character, which was, just an interesting experience. And here comes this person as I'm living my glory and just representing LGBTQ community and as well as all my other wrestling comrades and people that just loved and adored me. This was a very kind of like, terror-stricken, scary incident that kind of, really kind of made me nervous in my surroundings and even at my other job. And we'll be at West of the Broadway Theater in Elmsford, New York, which is a great musical theater company at the time. And I was just being there eating my food and just be like, oh God, this is just hard. For this 2014 holiday season, just like, oh, this is too hard. I can't believe what I'm dealing with here. So just amazing things like that. But it was just such a great. And then what happened with John and I working on this thing. I left the industry in November 2018 after doing the big event. We had Hollywood from Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. You guys, of course, are aware of that, of her. She's someone of icon in ladies wrestling. Had her signing autographs for us at that time. We also had Malta the Damager. Patrick, Malta. I think he lives right down the road from you practically.
We had
him signing autographs. So we had a great great booth and everything. But it's just like, I was concerned about, I wasn't making enough money. But at the time, creatively, I felt like I was creatively sound. And, my wrestling stuff, being an in-ring performer and manager, what was great about that was the showmanship was very good. My ring work had its moments at times, but I felt like the showmanship really kind of maybe triggered sometimes the ring work to be solid. The showmanship was really something that really was like kind of like with Hogan or Ultimate Warrior, for example. But it was just like a money thing. I was like, I'm not making the money, and now I'm doing this big event. I feel like I'm losing money. But what it was, and I want to tell the people at home about this, is that you always have to take into consideration the concept of money, budgeting, and things like that. Is very crucial, and I wasn't taking that into consideration. Time went on, and I had eBay items up. I took the big event items put on eBay, and then all of a sudden, these are the wrestling items from big event. My sales went up on eBay, so I'm like, okay, but I'm like, I can just sell this stuff. I'll make a living at it. Time went on, blah blah blah. Finally, my cousin Deanna, and I spoke about this in the Legacy Comics interview. If you want to read that on legacycomics.com, my cousin Deanna, a young woman, she's in college right now. Just an incredible. I love my cousin so much. She's such an incredible young woman, and she such a smart, uncanny, she's a character. You would think that you're watching a movie when you see her because she's so original and unique and unprecedented. And she is the reason why I said, okay, you gotta do your thing again. You gotta go back out there and do your thing again, because now, and this was May 9, 2019. This was 8 days before her Sweet 16 party. And things were building up, and I said, okay, you have to do your thing again. And lo and behold, John gives me a call. It's kind of like how, the road was here. Unbelievable. And we started just molding things in and bringing things in together. And then we just worked hard, built this story together. There was times where there was genuine concern involved. And a lot of times in the genuine concern, you feel like you've exhausted all your options. So it is true. You exhaust all your options, but then you also have to just always come up with another option to really, what's going to really drill you to really go out there. And then I just said, John and I talked earlier and said, let's come up with a comic book. And we got in touch with Patrick Hickey with that.
Well, hey, the storylines, as they say, the dominoes fall into place and everything just happens perfectly. I want to touch on one more thing before we go into the comic itself. Justin, seeing your story being told in the documentary format, we've seen it with WWE superstars, Keith Lee, Dean Ambrose, and all those kind of individuals. For yourself to see your journey, your storyline, your growth as an individual and a wrestler on a paid platform like Vimeo for the documentary, what does that mean for yourself?
Well, I'm actually humble about it, and I'll tell you why. Because really, in this documentary, you see a lot of indie talent that I worked with, and even two that really strike a chord in me in a great positive way is Tyrone Kidd and Ariane Clemente, who are in there. Okay. And I booked those guys. And originally we were supposed to have two separate matches. Me, Tyrone, I think it was, and Ariane and Justin Henry. Justin Henry called out sick. He got sick. So we had a triple threat match. And if you see that match is in there. And that was such a touching moment because those guys really worked hard. So I want to be humble about this. I don't want to be like the kind of guy I'm trying to be big-headed. No, we have to also give credit to the indie talent that are in that. They were the guys that really also helped the flow of the documentary. Without those indie talents, guys, if it was just G and Frankie, I feel like the story would be kind of just watered down. When you put in all the indie talent from those Tyrone, Ariane Clemente, and things like that, the other guys you've seen in there, it really drove the story. And we like to say this documentary is like you're at an indie show. So it's not like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to disparage any other documentaries out there. There's been a lot of great documentaries out there. But this is a documentary you feel like you're on the edge of your seat and you're watching an indie show with your mother and with your son and daughter, your wife or whatever, or the wife is bringing her husband saying, "Oh, come on, honey, I want you to come to the show with me. I want to see G and Frankie in the main event." And then we got all these other Ariane Clemente kid. You feel like you're actually at an indie show. And that's why I just think the concept, and John laid out this concept, I just think it's just pure genius to – and now, as wrestling right now, what is driving the wrestling business is the indie circuit. And now I feel like we are broader. I feel like the indie circuit is what's broadening wrestling. You got a lot of talent out there that are now showing there are entrepreneurs as well. And then you have a lot of people, the women's division are really broadening things up as well. And just coming in, I see also the talent now and the young talent are just coming up with ways on how to get the crowd going. And what's also broadening the business too is how talent are able to adjust to different crowds. So if they could go to New York City or they could go to like Greenwich, Connecticut one day, and they'll maybe get new fans. And I think we are the wrestling business on the right track. And I know people are unsure if there's going to be a boom period. I strongly, strongly predict that we will see another boom period, unprecedented compared to the 80s and 90s. And I'm also thinking that we are going to see another territory type thing going on, which is kind of pretty much happening now because we see a lot of guys now want to go to other places to win belts in other places, which I think is incredible.
Oh my God, Justin, do you have like a magic 8 ball there or something, or a big crystal you're looking into and seeing the future? I mean, man of myth there. My God. Now, Patrick, I'm going to ask you to introduce us to Legacy Comics. What was the inception of the company itself?
So I would say about a year and a half ago, I was a contracted creator for a company out of Virginia called Lesser Known Comics. I had interviewed their CEO for my website, reviewfix.com, got a ton of traffic. And after the interview, they were like, if there's ever anything that we could do for you, And I mean, I interview singers, songwriters, comic book creators, video game developers every day. So it's just like whatever. I get a thank you. I owe you a favor like every day. It's like whatever. It's not a big deal. But what had happened was I was sitting on this script and this proof of concept comic for about 2 years. I had written it about 20 years ago when I was 18. And it's called Condry. And it's about a homeless New York City vigilante that's on the hunt for the gang that killed his father. Very Punisher, very Deadpool-y, very, 1986, 87 Daredevil, Frank Miller, Sin City. And when this guy was like, oh, if you ever need anything, it was like light bulb went off.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, actually. So I sent him our little 6-page ash can that Kieran X Quinn and I had done, and who's an amazing artist. And like a half an hour later, they're like, yeah, we want to sign you. So I'm like, okay. So that was around February of 2021. And I worked there until November 1st, 2021. And we produced Condry 0, 1, 2, and 3. So we did 4 issues in like 7 months. Probably could have done even more. And but the entire time I was like under the learning tree of the company's CEO. And I've written 7 books in the last 5 years on video game history. I'm in over 1,000 libraries worldwide: Harvard, Stanford, UCLA, Berkeley, University of Shanghai, all over the place. So I've been in publishing for 20 years. I'm a former NBC editor. So I've been all over the place. So just like the more I watched the way this company was being run, I would just go to my wife every night in bed. I'm like, it's not doing it right. And she's like, you're not going to be happy unless you're boss. That's just the way you are. You have to be the boss. Or and I said, no, it's like I either have to be the boss or I have to respect the boss enough to know that like I'm going into battle like with someone that I believe in. Like I don't have to be Ric Flair, but I definitely have to be Arn Anderson. I wouldn't be happy being Barry Windham or Tully. Like I would have to be Arn or Rick. Like that's just the way I run. So handed in my notice on November 1st for lesser known comics, but like for like the 3 months prior, I was having conversations with a friend who had graphic design experience and who I had gotten some cover experience, John Svedesi. I had gotten him some covers to video game magazines and some comics, and we just laid out the groundwork for what would become Legacy Comics. And we had no followers on Instagram, Facebook, nothing. And we go to Kickstarter and we get funded in like 3.5 hours. Yeah, it was great. As I basically cashed in every favor that I had. Like in terms of like anyone that had owed me anything, I was just like, listen, this is my next thing that I'm doing. Like support it, share it. You don't have to pledge, just share it, blah, blah, blah. So we were funded in 3.5 hours. We ended up going 301% overall. And like I said, I'm a journalist. So like I got us a TV spot, I got us local newspaper coverage and stuff. And ironically, that TV spot is what, John and Justin ended up seeing that introduced them to us. So we launched Legacy with 4 comics. Then we added a 5th when the Bram Stoker estate reached out to us, and we actually did a Bram Stoker prequel comic, Bram Stoker's Dracula prequel comic, based on 125-year-old unpublished notes from Bram Stoker's Dracula. So that all started in November. We released 2 more books in the summer, and we released 4 in the fall, and we've got another 4 coming out in the winter. We had LeBeau Underwood from DC and Marvel Inc. a book for us. We just had Johnny Desjardins from Marvel and DC do a cover for us. We just announced it today. So I've been reading comic books my entire life. I've also been a journalist for over 20 years. I've covered pro wrestling for 15 years. So it's just like all of this stuff just like kind of all came together beautifully. So that's kind of like where we're at now. I try and tell people our comics are basically in this weird place of having as wide open a window as possible. So like when you look at comics from the 80s and the 70s, there's lots of panels. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm more of a fan of the Rob Liefeld Image Comics style of the mid to late 90s, where there's more open panels and you get to see more art and the art really guides the story. I think people like that more, but we have like a healthy medium, so it's like the best of the old and the best of the new. Like when you guys get your hands on Gia and Frankie, you're going to see there's a nice amount of narrative, but there's like so much space for the art to tell the story. And that's to try and bring in new readers and then, you know, get that nostalgia bug at the same time. So it's kind of like, that's exactly like what we do at Legacy Comics. In addition to Gia and Frankie, we also have another wrestling book called The Job, which is about a jobber who loses all of his matches but moonlights at night robbing banks with his wife. So that's done great for us. And I really feel like the audience for The Job, when they see Gia and Frankie, are totally going to jump on board. And right now is just like a really good time for indie creators. And then also too, I mean, a lot of people aren't talking about this, but the best comic book this entire year, the one that everyone's talking about, is called Do a Powerbomb from Image Comics. And it's this beautifully drawn, wonderfully written story. So it's just like, wrestling right now is a ton of fun to watch. Comic books are going in really fun places. Just the combination of these two things, just a lot of fun. That's basically Legacy Comics. And then, I mean, if you wanted us to get into like how the comic came together, I'm all down. But that's how Legacy got funded. That's how we got started. We've got a whole bunch of crazy stuff coming out for the winter. We're super excited about the future. We've got a ton of stuff that we can't even announce yet. We've had 2 major announcements this week with the Johnny Desjardins cover for Legend of the Night Owl, and we announced a new book, and we have a ton of other stuff that we're going to announce soon too. So.
My God, Patchy, you've got a bag of tricks right there, just with one another. My God, man, electric right there. I love it. But I do want to touch on one thing. From my history of the comic book industry, I know that it crashed in the 90s with pricing and everything, and people thinking this comic is going to be worth millions. It's going to be like Action Comic #1, and I'm going to make a killing off it. From starting a comic book industry now, how do you avoid those kind of trappings from the past?
Well, see, the thing is, it's so funny because I'm a historian. Like I said, I've written 7 books on video game history, but I'm also a huge historian, like in general, of pop culture. And one of the reasons why the comic book industry had such a problem in the 90s is because variant covers had just become a thing. So it was like, let's do a regular Spider-Man cover. Let's do a hologram cover. Let's do this. Let's do that. And the market was not ready for something like that. People thought it was like double dipping. So a creator would go, my comic sold 1 million copies. And then somebody would go, no, your 4 or 5 covers combined sold 1 million copies. So then, you know, the market just like was not ready for it at all. So there's a comic book journal interview from 1992 from Todd McFarlane, who's the creator of Spawn, and he's just this rock star in comic book publishing. And he said, I'm totally against multiple covers of comics. Fast forward to last week, and there's a Spawn team up series, and there's going to be like 50 something covers. So the thing is, the man that said that he would never do multiple covers is now like, he's Todd McFarlane, and Spawn is like the king of like the variant cover. He gives so many artists an opportunity to like, you know, strut their stuff. So this was the beginning of the industry starting to change. The video game industry crashed in 1982, and that was mainly because console games were not nearly as good as arcade games. And people were like, why am I going to pay $60 for Pac-Man when I can just go play it for $1, you know, for 25 minutes and get my fix? And then it took a good 18, 19 years for video games to catch up to the point where like anything that you play in your house is better than anything that you could play in the arcade. So it's just like comic books had to go through that experience too. Wizard magazine, I'm not sure if you guys remember it. It went out of business about 10 years ago. They had this big thing where they did something no other comic book publication would do. So you have the video game buyer's guide, the comic book buyer's guide. You have the Overstreet comic book guide, where they would tell you how much your comics were worth. Okay. But they would never tell you that your comics decreased in value. They basically said that like your comic book would always be worth, like if you paid 50 cents for it, it would always be worth 50 cents. So, but Wizard instituted this thing where they would be like, that comic that you just bought for $8, it's only worth $2 now. And it's been out for like a month. And you're like, wait, what? And there was like no basis for any of this stuff. And lo and behold, we find out now 15, 20 years later that Wizard was written by a bunch of like, 20, 25-year-old kids that they weren't making this stuff up. They were trying to make educated guesses, but like they were really hurting comics that they didn't like. They were trying to be tastemakers. And when you look at like the Overstreet pricing guide, which is still like the standard bearer, they never say, oh yeah, this comic isn't selling, so it's not worth anything. They're like, no, this comic, it might not be selling, but it's still worth like what you paid for it. It will never go down in value. It's just, so the comic book industry has had to do a lot of adapting. And the 90s was the beginning of that adaptation. I mean, look at WWE in like 1994, 1995. They call it the new generation. And you had Bret Hart, you had Shawn Michaels, you had Jeff Jarrett, you had Razor Ramon, you had Kevin Nash. All of these people that we know now are legends. But in 1994, 1995, people were like, well, who's going to be the next Hogan? Who's going to be the next Savage? Who's going to be the next Ultimate Warrior? Who's going to be the new Jake Roberts? And the answer to that question was there wasn't going to be a new of any of those guys. There was going to be a first Shawn Michaels. There was going to be a first Bret Hart. And the thing is, sometimes it takes people some time to adapt to that. So I feel like in comic books, especially in the 70s and 80s, you had Dave Cockrum, you had John Byrne, you had Neil Adams, you had Bill Sienkiewicz, you had all of these killer artists. And then by the 90s, they're getting a little long in the tooth. And the next group of people, the L Boys, Ron Lim, Robbie Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, they were all coming up and no one knew who they were. And it took a little while for these guys to really like just kill the industry in the best way possible and just start things completely over. So every field, every form of pop culture goes through some type of rise and fall. If you're not constantly reevaluating like where you're at and adapting and trying to make things happen every single day, then you eventually die. So the fact that like comic books have been this steadfast medium for basically at this point over 100 years in American and world culture, it says a lot about their ability to adapt. So I don't doubt that comic books are going to go through another, crash at some point. Sure. I don't doubt that wrestling won't go through some crash. I don't doubt that video games won't go through some crash, but they'll rise again because they're permanent fixtures in pop culture history.
Very much so. I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll get a remake of E.T. for the Atari, and that's when we'll know the real dark times are ahead of us.
Absolutely. And I mean, see, you just touched on a super important thing because, like, I've interviewed the creator of E.T. on Atari 2600 in my first book. And that's a game that people on the internet just love to shit on. And the true story behind that game is, like, that game was made in a very short amount of time by one guy. And he was probably the only guy that wanted the project and the only guy that could do the project in that time. And the fact of the matter is, like, Atari bought that license for like $28 million in 1982 or 1981. And in order for them to make back their profit, they would have to sell somewhere between like 7 or 8 million copies of the game. Nowadays, you say 7 or 8 million. Pokemon Arceus Legends sold like 9 million, sold 14 million copies in 9 months. So, if Pokemon could do it, then I'm sure E.T. could do it. One of the greatest film licenses of all time. No, because the Atari wasn't in everyone's house at the time. It was considered a luxury item, and only one other game in Atari history up until that point had sold more than 7 million copies. So from the get-go, from the day that contract was signed for E.T., the video game, it was destined to become a failure. Destined. So it's so easy for someone like the Angry Video Game Nerd or Pat Contry or one of these people to go online and talk shit. Oh, it's a terrible game. It's a terrible game. It's just like, you do it. Exactly. You do what that man did, So yeah.
Cost of crunch, and now we've got a landfill in New Mexico filled with a bunch of cartridges.
Absolutely. And see, the thing is, too, if you watch that documentary, they'll tell you E.T. wasn't the only game in that landfill. There was millions of games, of Atari games, of all shapes and sizes. Some of the greatest games in Atari's history, Defender, Joust, F1, like Haunted House, Adventure, they were all in that landfill, too. So, yeah. But it's just so easy. It's like you're talking about how you interviewed E3 before the interview started, that create your own narrative. So many people do that when they look at pop culture wrestling. They create a narrative. If they love pro wrestling, they will die. They will want to be buried in their NWO shirt. But if they hate pro wrestling, then they just hate it. If they hate comics, they just hate it, and they don't know why. Everyone just creates their own narrative. So the thing that I love about this project is it's just like there's so much fandom attached to it. So you have backyard wrestling, you have indie wrestling, you have pro wrestling, you have comic books, and it's just a marriage of all of these forms of pop culture that it's almost impossible to be like, well, I'm not going to read it because I don't like wrestling, and then I go, well, it's not really about wrestling. It's about the human condition. It's about like if I had to say what this comic book was in like one sentence, I say it's the Karate Kid, it's Mickey Rourke's The Wrestler, and it's Scream, all put into one.
Okay, Scream's an interesting choice there that I did not see coming. What do you think Scream and that relationship is? What? Come on, tell me more. Give me more.
Because
details.
the thing is, when you see Frankie Firestarter in this comic, all of a sudden this goes from a coming of age story that's like very Mickey Rourke the Wrestler and the Karate Kid. Like Gia, the nomad, is finding their way through the comic book, through the wrestling industry. They finally discover themselves. It's like they won. You're the best around, you know. And then all of a sudden, Frankie's sitting there, and you're like, wait, this is different. The game just changed. This just went from like a feel good coming of age, everything happened, to, oh wait, this is something very different. This guy is not nice. This is going in a completely different direction. So yeah, there's definitely like, I wouldn't say horror, but there's definitely like a thriller element involved in this comic. And see, this is really like behind the scenes, like getting granular, like baseball behind the, dugout kind of story. I remember when the Jambone people pitched me, I read the email first. I had a co-owner at the time. I'm the sole owner of the company now. And I watched the documentary, and I'm like, okay, first off, I'm in, because any opportunity to do another wrestling comic that works, I'm totally in. So that I was already in. So now I'm like, okay, the best part of this documentary is that on its own, it stands tall. People will enjoy it by itself. But I feel like I'm like, you know what? I can make a comic that will make people want to watch the film. And then people could watch the film and then still want to read the comic. So there's crossover. No one's going to be stepping on each other's toes. Like, it's just going to be great. So then I remember I go to my co-owner and I'm like, we need to talk to these people. We need to do this. They reached out to us, and he's just like, well, we already have a wrestling comic. I don't want to be a wrestling comic publisher. I don't want to do it. And I was like, listen, they want to meet with us. You never say no to the meeting. You always have the meeting, So then we have the meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I look at him and he's just like, they're really nice. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't want to have the meeting. You didn't want to have the meeting. So then he went from absolutely not wanting to do the book to, okay, let's do it. And then the way it all worked out was I ended up becoming the sole owner of the company, taking his ownership share. And he went on, he's doing his own thing now. But the thing was, this was somebody, if we could convert somebody that didn't want anything to do with another wrestling comic to now he wanted to do something, I'm like, yeah, we're in a really good spot here. So then, like I said, I believed in this project like from day one. And my first thought was, we could make this a comic book that too stands on its own. Because if you've never heard of the documentary and you just read the comic, you're like, oh, this is really good, I want more. And then the way we have it set up is that like right at the end, you know exactly where to go, So this is really fun. This was a really fun project. It's an 8-page ash can, so it's a super tease. It's just like as soon as you get comfortable, it's over. But that's like the best. Those are the best ones, Exactly. So yeah.
Hey, short and sweet, gives the story what it needs, and the viewers get to enjoy it.
But yeah, like I said, Karate Kid, Mickey Rourke's The Wrestler, and Scream. If you like any three of those things, if you like coming of age stories, if you like stories of people having to rise above and find themselves amid all the chaos in their lives, and then you like a little twist at the end, a little M. Night Shyamalan in there, then you're good to go. You will totally dig The Ballad of Gia and Frankie.
Well, with the comic book, I mean, like even with the documentary, the targeted demographic is Gen Z to millennials, and then even for the comic book, we had to, coincide, have that same target demographic. And that's a very crucial demographic to target, basically because they're showing a lot of, promise and a lot of just interesting things. And a lot of them like to lead. They like to lead the path for others. And they also have a broad range of things. They even like, they have an eclectic range of ideas. And they also like, things like even from the past. And I mean, I've always been an eclectic person, and it's nice to relate to them. I remember my friend Irene and I, back in the day, Irene was a talented violinist, violist out in Rockland County, New York, and also a school teacher. We were always eclectic, and we were always those, Irene and I always were those two that we were those misfits, but we had deep feeling and emotion. And my feeling is when you're like that person, you're not weird. Irene and I think consider ourselves to be weird back then, but we weren't. We were originals. We were really unprecedented. We were the weird ones. To me, are the persons that are always trying to find something and just can't seem to grasp something. But we always had these personas where we knew what we wanted, or we had something secure. And now I see a lot of the Gen Z millennials now are kind of like, I see like me in them, or I see Irene and things like that in there. So I just feel like, let's really market towards them. Let's give them a story that they could relate to. Let's always, and then, it's also trying to inspire them, trying to educate them. It's realistic. It makes it when you look into it, you finally realize, okay, professional wrestling is real.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of real components to professional wrestling, and there's things like that in there. But as Patrick said, it's a thriller. It's like you got a lot of broad range of things. It's a broad spectrum. If you, I want to just say that. And but yeah, I think it's also the type of thing that you may want to, if you're not a wrestling fan, you may want to take a look and say, okay, now I want to go to a wrestling show and see more of what this is about here. But as I said, with indie wrestling and things like that, what we're seeing here is we're seeing people, talent promoters, bookers, showing that we could broaden the business. It's not just Vince McMahon that could broaden things up. Now we're showing we could broaden things up. I mean, we even have Tony Cini, who is a talented indie wrestler. He has a video game now that he created. I don't know if you know about that, any of you, Sol and Patrick?
No,
Tony Cini came up. We have Stan Michael, who I spoke with recently. He's an indie wrestler throughout the Northeast area. I think he's going to other territories too. He's a R&B artist, and and I spoke to him on the phone, and he is very sure about his direction. And I'm like, I was so taken back by this guy. I'm like, this guy just really knows what he wants, how he wants wrestling to be, how he wants R&B to be, how he wants his career to be. He just really takes control, and his entrance is unique. He comes out with his entrance, music hits, and he's out there on the microphone, and he's singing, and he's entertaining people. People are like, oh my God, their heart's racing. You got an R&B concert going on in there. And, our demographic, they love R&B, and Stan Michael is someone that, resonates with our demographic. So, we're just seeing just so many great things just popping up, and I want with the indie circuit and everything. We just feel like we're so blessed to, I'm so blessed to get another opportunity to do this, because the G Savage brand there was a lot of damages done to it, and I felt like it could never ever have any revival, nothing. There was so many, and I don't even want to get to all the damages to it, but it was just so scary, very scary. You get an idea of it when you read the interview on legacycomics.com. It was a very scary brand that I had to, but now I'm seeing how now our demographic and how society is, they could appreciate it. I remember my friend Jose and his wife watched the documentary, and he was like, and he lost faith in wrestling. He stopped watching it, years ago. He said, I'm a Flair and Ultimate Warrior guy, but that's it. He watched the documentary, him and his wife rented it, and he was like, that character was ahead of its time, he said to me. And so it's just, I think now we're, people are getting more human, more emotional, more sensitive. When I did that character, I would be backstage, and it wasn't taken seriously a lot of times. There was a lot of, it was interesting, and now times are changing, and now it's it's more appreciated and everything. I would say
very much so, Jason. Absolutely agree there. You mentioned advertising to the Gen Z millennial area, and we've seen people complain about wrestling's ratings. This show got under 1 million. This show is just staying stagnant. Do you think the way the climate is now with the the human race and everything, and the wrestling business, it will never get to those heights of 4 million and 5 million back in the Attitude Era? Or do you think
I think eventually it will. What we have to take into consideration here is we have to, and Eric Bischoff said this, he said, we can't get better, we got to get different. When he went to war with WWE, Monday Night War, he tried to be better than WWE. It wasn't working. He said, we can't be better, we got to be different. things have to be different. And I don't want to just pinpoint who's doing this, who's doing that. I mean, that's a very sensitive topic, and I'm not here to criticize here. We're here to promote. But I will just say things that have to be drastically done is coming up with innovation. I'm not saying we have to go, pushing the envelope so drastically. I mean, me, Attitude Era, I liked it, but I didn't like it because I felt like, and I could resonate with what Road Warrior Animal did say a number of years ago, that he felt there was a lot of cheap heat involved. I do agree with that. Even though I do like Vince Russo to a certain extent, I do like him to a certain extent because I feel like there is some artistry in his stuff with some of the segments that he did with Crash TV and things like that. So I'm going to be honest with you. I want to tell you what I like, but I just feel like there was some cheap heat involved. I think when we have to move forward, we have to take into consideration that people want characters, and I'm seeing some characters on the indie circuit that I'm taken back by, like Raina Black, Era Spiral, Riley Crow. These are 3 female talent. Raina Black does an incredible job with heel heat. Saw her in a show in Jersey for Lock Target Wrestling. She gets heel heat like it's very realistically. Let's say you and I are in the high school hallway. We're 3 guys. We're the head of the chess club. The rest of the high school people don't really appreciate us too much, whatever. It's a bunch of football players. Raina Black's crew is up against the lockers. She sees us. She's going to try to needle us because we're the leaders of the chess club. The way Raina Black did the heel heat at this show in Jersey for LTW, it was like you were in a high school hallway and you had no way of getting out of your little corner because Raina Black got you in the corner and she was taunting. There was a fan in the crowd, young woman with her kids, and she was really taking Raina Black literal. It got real to the point where Raina Black was like, come on, and the woman looked like she was about to burst out of her seat and attack Raina Black. And every time Raina Black came back on, because she had to work different spots, I kept looking at the corner of my eye. Okay, is that fan going to come out? Is she going to attack Raina Black? That's how just amazing, she was when I saw her. And I don't want to just pinpoint which names are making an impact. There's a lot of names making an impact, but I'm just saying that this was the most recent show I saw. And I saw these 3 as a Raina Black, Era Spiral, Bradley Crow, they're the type of wrestlers, workers that you put them in any type of situation, even people that never even saw entertainment before, and they'll try to find a way to conform to how they view things and try to appease their views or whatever it is. But they could even be sheltered, trapped in a corner like Buffalo Bill did to his hostage in Silence of the Lambs. They could still bring that person to life. That's how much. When you think about that, you could see that wrestling can be broadened. When you have the right talent, you have the right booking sheets that are put together by the bookers, how the promoters are putting their shows together, how they feel like the fans have to be handled and treated before they're getting settled in, before the show starts and throughout the show. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and how the things have to be broadened with wrestling again. We can't just say Vince McMahon is the only one that could do it. No one else could do it, and that's it. That's complete rubbish malarkey, definitely, to say something like that. As I said, we got a lot of people in the indie circuit that are upstanding individuals that are proving that we could get the job done. And that's why I'm thinking a boom period is on the way. I don't know when, but it seems like it's on the way here.
Very much soon, hopefully soon, for the good old indie wrestling business. Patrick, what about yourself as a fan? Do you feel like wrestling ratings can get back to the Attitude Era, 4 million, 5 million in due time?
Sure, absolutely. I just feel like every generation of wrestling, there is a generational talent, and there are people out there that claim to be generational talents, but the ratings don't say so. So the thing is, it's just like, for me, growing up, I watched wrestling in the 80s when I was a kid, and you had Hulk Hogan, and you had Ric Flair, and you had Sting, and then in the 90s you had Hogan again, and you had Sting, and you had Stone Cold Steve Austin, and you had The Rock, and then in the early 2000s, 2010s, you had the whole Cena era and CM Punk and things like that. But now it's just like, these were people that these were people that got people that did not watch wrestling to watch wrestling. Goldberg, same exact thing. Whenever Goldberg would come on the television, my mother would go crazy to the point where my dad would be like, you know what? if I ever met him, I'd put a bullet in his head, because like my dad hated how crazy my mother would go. My mother was in love with Goldberg. She's like, oh my God, he's amazing. Blah, blah, blah. And then my wife likes wrestling. She doesn't love it, but when John Cena comes on the TV, she's like, dun, 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 dun. She's a wrestling fan now. So the thing is, there's not that one person now that will get people to tune in that are not wrestling fans. And also too, there's that whole suspense of disbelief. You know, one of my favorite indie wrestlers, George the Inner Saint Santi, he's been on Raw the last couple of weeks, and AEW is like, you know, backstage people and stuff. He's been, you know, a security guard and stuff like that, but he's been on the indie scene for like 10 years, and he's like, great wrestling is like the Lion King on Broadway. You know that they're not lions, but for a second you think that they are. And the thing is, great professional wrestling, you'll go, yeah, I know that like that was a planned spot, but man, like that felt real to me. And the thing is, I don't know if there's that one person, male or female right now, that is that generational talent. And the thing is, sometimes there are some generations where there is not that talent. And that's why you have those dips in viewership and stuff like that. And it happens in every medium. It happens in comic books. It happens in video games. It happens in families. You see great families crash because there isn't a mother, a father, or a grandparent that like holds everything together and stuff. It's just a part of life. So do I think that pro wrestling can get back to 5 million? Absolutely. It's just that talent maybe hasn't been discovered yet. And as much as I love people like MJF and John Moxley and Austin Theory and all of these like guys that are out there, I don't know if they are the generational talent. So, and I don't know if it exists yet. But do I think that they can get back to 5 million? Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Well, who knows? Maybe that generational talent's just some random person on the indies who's busting it in, you know, some random hall, and they're going to have that chance to take the industry by storm. Maybe in 10.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely in for a treat.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that about the comic as well, actually. When I saw it on the Instagram, the cover caught me as well, the default cover, not the variant cover. I always feel like a cover is very important for a comic to be noticed either in the shops or online. Actually, I think I might have it on me. One of my favorite comic covers is this one I own of, God, it's old. This version of Spider-Man right here. It's
a classic. I'm pretty sure that's John Romita. That's a John Romita senior cover. I think.
This is truly a stunning cover as well. For the cover of Ballad of Gia Frankie, what were the elements you wanted to show in the cover to capture viewers' attention?
So the first thing I wanted to show was the duality of Gia and the Nomad. I wanted that to be front and center. I also wanted Frankie to have a spot on there. I wanted to try and hit as many parts of that. Like I said, that three-headed monster of coming of age, pro wrestling, and the spin at the end. I wanted all of that captured in the beginning. Joshua Adams, our artist, he's done a couple of other comics for us that were really like he did a comic called Dem Goals with us, which is more of a comedic one that is super funny and lewd, and just like it reminds me of something from like Animaniacs in the 1990s. But then he also did Sarita, which was super emotional for us. So it's just like he has a lot of range, and I feel like he was able to capture all of those emotions in the beginning. So that's the thing. A lot of people will buy a comic based solely on the cover. So if you cannot hit the cover as hard as possible, sometimes people aren't going to be willing to open it up. So you've got to have a sexy cover. And I feel like in the case of Gia and Frankie, we not only have one good cover, but we have two great covers. So the second one obviously is an homage to the Chris Claremont, Frank Miller Wolverine run when he's got his, that artist, Valentin Quinones, is a good buddy of mine. We've worked on video games together. We've worked in the video game industry for quite some time together. He actually designs ring gear for wrestlers as well. I helped open a lot of doors for him. He's helped me a ton of times. So like, I basically went to Justin and John and was like, if we're going to do this right, we need at least one variant cover. And they were like, oh, well, how do we do that? And I'm like, I got it. I'll take care of it. And we ended up getting a really sexy variant. But in terms to go back to the original, for me, it's that three-headed monster of the coming of age story of the Nomad. Gia's discovery and acceptance of herself, and Frankie coming onto the scene and just changing the game entirely. All three of those things had to be captured in the cover, and I think we did a really good job of that.
Oh, absolutely. It is truly a striking cover as well. It definitely caught my attention as well. You've done an absolute fan job, you and your artists, creating a
Thank
really
you.
great. So well done for
Thank
that.
you.
I want to touch upon with Justin as well. I've had previous members of the LGBT community on the show, Jambone from Scotland, Visage from London, and Kid Bandit from the States. And they always talk about how they want to get their stories told, no matter who they are, and they want to share their passion and their life stories as well. Do you feel like in the industry we are now, with 2022 ending and going to 2023 for the wrestling business, are we going to see more elevated LGBT stars in main event storylines in the wrestling business?
Do I think that's going to happen? Yeah, I think that's going to happen. And I think we're going to. I think that's going to happen. We're going to probably see a unique way they're going to do it. I think they're going to do it in a unique way. I don't know if I should be commenting on that because I don't know how every individual. I mean, anyone from LGBTQ or communities outside of that, all of them know a specific way on how they feel they need to do it. So I can't even say how they're going to do it, but I think we're going to see some unique components to how they're going to do it. And I feel like no matter what community you're part of, I think as long as you find unique ways, it's kind of like you have to look at it this way.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like there was The Adventures of Lois and Clark one time. And, we had Lois Lane played by Terry Clark, right? I think that was correct. Yeah. Was that the actress?
Terry Hatcher.
Terry Hatcher.
They're real and they're spectacular.
Yeah. So she was trapped in some sort of room where it's caving in on her and she's being squeezed in. So I think, all talents, all communities within the wrestling industry have to look at themselves as always being in that type of room. And how do we find a way to escape that room, escape that a problem that we have, atrocity that we have plaguing us inside that room. And if you can think of it that way, you could maybe just do that you'll escape the insurmountable odds and you'll really shock people and draw large crowds. I think you have to think of every type of passion, dream, pride, whatever you have that you pursue, and you got to think of it always about being in a tight room to escape. So I'm confident you'll see a lot of LGBTQ workers, wrestlers, making a loud noise to the point of main eventing WrestleManias, main eventing Wrestle Kingdoms in Japan, or was it AAA Triple Mania? Was it called in Mexico, for example?
Yeah.
All these type of companies out there. It's just but there's a certain way you have to do it. And my belief is that no matter what community you're part of, LGBTQ, or no matter what community you're part of, you have to think about yourself as you have to compete with everyone, all type of communities. And if you kind of think of it that way, I think it's also going to be a lot easier. Excuse me, a lot easier to definitely have that drive to just make a lot of noise so easily, and always recognize the talents and abilities you bring out in your wrestling persona, with the way you're positioning yourself. And being your wrestling persona is it's a very, very crucial, critical type of situation, which there's a lot of components. You can't just work, you can't just talk, you can't just flaunt your charisma, whatever it is. There's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration being a in-ring performer. Excuse me. And that's the way you have to do it. You just have to find a way to stand out from the rest, and always recognize the talents, the abilities you have, and how to position them on the mic. And there's a lot of LGBTQ talents I do appreciate, like Nyla Rose. I remember watching her in Warriors of Wrestling. Came across her in 2017. Sonny Kiss, I met him, I believe, in ECPW when I was working around when Gino Caruso's promotion, ECPW. Saw him in Ace Pro. And then he hung out at our booth at the big event when Ali Rex was signing autographs for us at the time. He has a lot of talent, great worker, very athletic. So a lot of great talent coming in there. And I'm sure we're going to see some great, great things from them storyline wise. And I think we're going to definitely see I think that gap between communities, I think that gap is going to change. And what's going to change is the talent that each community, LGBTQ, even Gothic community, everyone, it's that, for example, all those type of communities are going to say, this is who I am, but we also recognize our talents, our abilities, on how to win over that crowd, how to work the match, how to stand alone in 60 minutes. That's what's going to do it here. I'm confident.
Very much so. If you believe in yourself.
Sorry about that.
The humidity is getting to you, my friend.
It's hot in
No,
this
it's-
room,
it's-
so we can do.
It's very much the saying, if you believe in yourself, others will believe in you.
Yeah.
Just take care of yourself at the end of the day. Now, Patrick, I want to shove it to you with the history of
Sure.
the comic industry. The comic industry was, a bit restricted with the Comic Code Authority back in the old days. I wanted to know if the Ballad of G and Frankie comic was released back then during the height of the Comic Code Authority. How do you feel like the Comic Code Authority would have reacted to it?
So this is the thing. When we were originally putting the script together, I wanted to make sure that we touched upon the LGBT themes, but I wanted to do it in a way where this was a wrestler that happened to be a part of the LGBT community instead of it being necessarily an LGBT wrestler, if that makes any sense. So my whole thing is just like, I feel like the theme of it being an LGBT wrestler is extremely important. It's just, I feel like in the generation that we're in now is like a lot of stuff is like force fed down people's throats, and that'll turn people off. So like if you present something like an LGBT wrestler, somebody automatically would be like, yeah, I'm done. Don't want to read it.
Mm-hmm.
Or don't want to watch it, which I think is terrible. I think it's disgusting. But that's just a fact of the matter of how the market is. But if you go, oh, this wrestler that has this story of like their mother didn't want them to be involved in pro wrestling, and they went to school and they trained and they just couldn't find themselves. And then when they embraced, who they really were, and they became a part of the LGBT community, then great things happen. Now you already have that person on the hook from the first sentence, and now they don't care that the person's LGBT, and they accept the person for who they are. I'm like, that's the type of that's the way I wanted the story to like kind of feel. And because this is the thing too, it's like at the end of the day, the Nomad, Justin, Gia, regardless of the gimmick, the person, still a person that has fought every single day to make their dreams come true. That's what we care about. Their sexual preference has nothing to do with what a special person they are. It's just another part of them that you have to accept if you want to be a part of their lives. And I think by the end of this comic, you're put in a position where you absolutely want to continue to follow this person's story, because you grow to accept them for who they are instead of being forced to accept them right in the beginning. It's just like there's a difference between going on a first date with somebody and having them tell you their entire life story the first date, and you're like, oh my god, wow. And there's another way to go about it where you go on 10 dates with somebody and you still only know just enough about them, and they just keep you coming for more. And comic books are like episodic TV. The best television, the best comic books just give you drips of the story and they pull you in. So all we did in this ash can was give you just enough of the character to make sure that you would appreciate them and want more. I think we've done a great job of that. To answer your question in terms of like the comic book code, I think there's nothing that would violate the comic book code in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time too, this would probably still be one that like maybe the comic book code would have an issue with, in the fact that like, the trainer's smoking and the character is beaten down emotionally. And then you've got the whole, like, the twist at the end. The comic book code could have possibly like toned this down a little bit. So, but at the same time too, this is a comic that anyone, I would say, from like 13 to 80 could read with no problem. There's no cursing or anything like that. This is just like a look inside someone's soul and like what makes them love professional wrestling so much and what they're willing to do in order to make their dreams come true. And the thing that they most needed to do in order to become a success in pro wrestling is to find out what they really were inside. I think there's a moment like page 4 or 5 where Nomad just says, you know what, screw this. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. And then this is where the success finally, you know, goes off the charts. And I think that's a story that, regardless of your sexuality, your religion, that you can learn from, because a lot of people just waste so much of their lives trying to be something that somebody else wants them to be. And then, you know, Stone Cold Steve Austin said it best: true success is you being you with the volume turned way up. So I think there's a moment where maybe like Nomad's volume is like stuck at a 5 out of 10, and then just turns that nozzle a little bit, and it's just like, here we go, time to do this, you know. So yeah, this is definitely like, it's different than, this is totally different than a lot of the comics that were released in the 60s and the 70s and stuff like that. I think like if Jim Shooter from Marvel would have seen this in the 70s, he would have been like, there needs to be more panels, there needs to be more words and stuff like that. And there's plenty of words in this, but the thing is, it's just like, this is extremely colorful. The color palette on this comic is very Image Comics, 1996, 1997. So that's the first thing. Wide open panels, super, lots of color. I would even say like a noir story feel, short, smooth sentences, good monologue that like paces the panels. So this is like a marriage of like really good like noir crime comics, but with a different type of feel, and the fact that this is really like a coming of age story. So yeah, the comic book code might not have been so nice to this book, but it's definitely one. It's not in your face and obtrusive read. Like, this is something, if somebody wants to get into pro wrestling, I would suggest they read this. If someone's had problems like trying to be honest with themselves and what they really want out of life, I would suggest them reading this. If someone that loves pro wrestling, I would suggest they read this. If somebody just wants something different, I would suggest. So like, yeah, this just hits on so many different levels, and it's a quick read too. Yeah. So it's just like, this is just something that you could like bang out and then go to your friend, oh, you want to see this, you know? So yeah, I'm super happy with it.